Hello and welcome to the Raising Athletes podcast. My name is Kirsten Jones. I'm a peak performance and sports parenting coach, author of now the 2-year-old book. I'm so proud of my little work that just keeps on going, Raising Empowered Athletes. I spent the last 10 years, but really the last 55 years, learning all about sports, what it means to grow, to fail, to learn, to have grit, to have resilience, all of the things that life teaches us when we play sports. And then now those of us that are lucky enough to be parents and get a chance to be on the sidelines and help our kids enjoy that journey as well. And it's hard because we have all the answers and we would like to jump in and help them not suffer as much, right? So right. I have two experts here today. I'm so excited about this conversation because I have to say this is the number one topic I get when parents reach out and they say, this anxiety is ruining our sports experience. And usually the question is, whose anxiety? Is it you, mom or dad, or is it you, the young athlete, or is it both? And so today I have two amazing, guests here to talk about that. They have their own podcast. They're experts in their field. And so if you could each take a turn, maybe Suzanne, we'll start with you to introduce yourself and your background and a little bit more about you.
Sure. Yep. We're excited to be here today. So I'm Dr. Suzanne Allen. I'm a clinical psychologist. And along with Dr. Annalise Caron, who will jump in a minute here, we have worked with kids and teens and parents for 40 plus years combined. And we are, broadly clinical psychologists. So we work with young people and families struggling with a wide array of mental health concerns. But along the way, we have worked with a number of athletes from the tiniest little ones in rec leagues all the way up to college and some professional leagues. So we have a love of sports and kind of the beauty of kind of all of the learning that goes along with that.
Yeah. And what ages do you have? Sorry, Suzanne, you have two. How many children do you have?
I have 3 children myself. So yep, I have a 17, almost 18, a 16, and a 12-year-old.
You're in the throes of it. It's perfect.
I'm in it.
Okay.
Yep. Oh, yes.
100% in it.
Yes. I listen to a lot of parenting podcasts myself, in addition to our podcast, the Parenting Therapist.
Very good. And I think Suzanne described it beautifully. I'm Dr. Annalise Caron. I'm also a clinical psychologist who treats children, adolescents, and adults. Suzanne and I have run a joint practice together for a number of years, and we've been in practice much longer than that. I also have 2 children. I have a 17, almost 18-year-old boy, and I have a 14-year-old girl. And we've our parents in our own lives, but do work with a lot of athletes, both in our families and in our practice. And so it's just a really timely topic that comes up a lot.
So when I was a D1 volleyball player, then I worked for Nike for 15 years. Then when you get pregnant, everyone hands you a copy of what to expect when you're expecting. And you just get so excited because you're like, this is awesome. I have all the answers in this one little book, and I'm just going to be the best parent ever. And then you get to kick and chase, and you're like, somebody's standing next to you going, not doing this rec thing, are you? Like, we've got a private coach, but like, we're going to Sweden this summer. We're already, we're already doing we're already playing up 2 levels, right? Mm-hmm. And the anxiety and the overwhelm and I started looking around thinking, I'm doing this wrong. And I think that's what's a lot of parents are. And we were just chatting before we started. I think that's all 3 of our missions, right? Is to help, I call it name it to tame it, which is understand what it is you're going through so that you can put some perspective and some guardrails around, that this is normal, that we all want to do what's best for our kids. I don't think there's a parent out there that's like, let me screw up my kids. We're all doing the best we can from where we are with what we've got. Mm-hmm. But how do we help parents who are where you are, where I am even, that are struggling with the anxiety? I mean, can we jump in right now with talking about the anxiety of sports and knowing what is the balance? Like, how do I know when it's okay for my kid to struggle and when is it time for me to jump in? Maybe Annalise, start with you.
Sure. When you were giving that sort of nice orientation and introduction, I thought of literally when my son was in kindergarten, and I had been a practicing psychologist for a number of years at that point. And I had that exact anxiety. It was which sport to choose, which one would he, how in the heck would I know? Right? Because I just had a little guy and I could feel that anxiety. And probably that was the most whipped up I was in those early years as I was figuring it out, who he was. Because ultimately, I think we have to parent the child we have, but also know that it's not unusual to feel anxiety when you're trying to do right by your child and figure it out. And I felt it. So,
yeah. And I think the important thing is really having that pause to be aware and catch that as a parent. And Kirsten, even some of the questions you're asking, like, what is this about? Is this about my child? Is this about me? What am I worried about here? Because the truth is most of us start down this path for, when surveyed, most parents say they sign their kids up for sports initially for fun, for the experience, for friends, right? And so I think most of us go into it with those ideas. Some of us who've maybe played, for longer time period can really look back. I can look back upon my own sports experiences and see there is no way I would be the person that I am now without having played sports. I was a kid who actually was nervous going in carpools. I was less afraid sometimes of the sport, and it was more being in a carpool with other people's parents and being worried about not knowing the answer to a question, right? Having to face a number of things through the years, right, has kind of brought me to this place. And so I can look back on that. And I think a lot of parents, right, have those experiences themselves and they want those for their child. And then once you start down that path, you're right. One of the beauties of sports is community. But one of the downsides is you do start hearing a lot of opinions or approaches or ways to go about things. And I think on the one hand, as parents, we do want to be open to those ideas. Some of the best ideas I've ever had, or some of the, have been from other parents helping me. But it is also important, as Annalise said, to think about parenting the child that we have within our family and within what our values are as a family. And so if someone is already traveling to Sweden for hockey matches, and that is great because it's part of their family's value system and they love that and that's how they want to spend their time, recognizing that that may not be the greatest thing for your child who needs to go to sleep every night at 8 p.m. and likes to sleep in their own bed and has a heart, really thinking about what you could gain from going along with some of those things and what your child might gain, but also what they might lose and what your family might lose, and really kind of contemplating that, because the truth is when we give parents advice or help them figure it out for themselves, like there are gains and losses, right? If you don't join the travel Sweden team, it is possible your child's going to fall behind, quote unquote, and not like, and they may be healthier and happier for other reasons because they spend time with their siblings on weekends and aren't always divided from the rest of the family, and really sitting and thinking about that. And that's hard to do because it takes a lot of distress tolerance from us as parents of, we're not going to maybe get everything.
If we only had that magic ball where we could see how things were going to play out, right? Because that's the stress that I have felt, and I feel like clients feel is, again, they're going down the rabbit hole of trying to figure out, well, if I go A, then this happens. If I go B, then this, and trying to project what might happen 2, 3, 5 years from now. And I'm always like, it's getting younger and younger. And I, like when I first started talking about this maybe 10 years ago, I used to always say, the people that were the pro athletes, they lean the furthest back because they know how hard it is. And all the ones that were D1 athletes, they're not that overwhelmed. It is now a $40 billion business. It's on its way to a $70 billion business. Kids are dropping out of sports by 13, but over 70%. Girls are dropping out at twice the rate of boys. And I have the parents, honestly, that were the former pro and D1 athletes calling me in distress saying, I need to figure this out. And I'm like, wait, what, you figured it out? He said, yeah, but he's 9 and he hasn't made the ones team yet. And he goes, he was awesome. He's like, I have to admit, I am so embarrassed by the number of sleepless nights I've had over my 9-year-old not making the ones team. Like, it is really eating people up from the inside out. What do you attribute that to?
I think there's genuinely what even just listening to you describe, that individual, there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of money in sports, and there are these different opportunities that weren't there when, this Gen Xer was, able to play softball. It's changed. So I think it's a real thing. And I think it also comes from a very good place a lot of the time. A lot of that stress, I want to do right by my child. I want to provide them all the opportunities. So it's navigating in that system, I think, is really hard for parents because they're wanting to provide whatever, opportunities are there. But at times it may be too much, or at times they might have a child who, like myself, was able to play sports when young, but probably today I might have X'd myself out earlier than I ultimately did. So it's a different world. It's challenging.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, unfortunately, you mentioned, or not unfortunately, you mentioned the finances behind this.
Yeah.
There's a lot of money in this, right? And before, when there was only one elite team in town, a certain amount of kids, and then you can create another elite team, and more parents will sign up for it, and more parents will sign up for it. And I think Annalise is right. It's multifaceted in parents' motivation to do this. I think the mistake and what gets publicized, which is where I think we're losing people, is the message is out that like everybody wants their kids to be better than everyone else, or, this is what's driving parents. And I actually think most of the time, and I'd be curious, Kirsten, what your clients say, it's less about, a scholarship or being the best player on the team. We hear much more about their friends all play, and if they're not there with them, they might miss out. And I want them, school is hard for them. My daughter's son has a learning disability, and this is where she feels really good. And I want her to still have a team to play on. I want my kids to play in high school just so that they have a community and they have something to do. And so I think it unfortunately, this big money business preys on these vulnerabilities that we have, rightfully so, to want to provide healthy and happy opportunities for our kids to engage physically with themselves and their peers, and to be with other people and have fun. And in a world where, we hear so much about social media and kids are disconnected, and it's like sports is a great opportunity that gets kids. I don't see anyone on the field with a phone in their face. Like it's this really nice thing. So I think parents really want that, and they want their kids to have that. And I do. And sure, it is fun to win. I'm competitive, like people want their kids to be good too. That's not, but I don't think that's always the big driving force that we hear about, and I think we're losing getting this messaging to parents of what you're talking about, really sitting with like these hard things to think about what this mean, for my child to stay in the rec league if all their friends are moving over to travel.
Oh. I have a friend here in LA who her father says, playing youth sports, it's cheaper than rehab. Okay, that's one way to look at it, right? I mean, right. You're like, right? I mean, like that. But to your point, I think most parents are in that boat of, yes, they're not even looking for the college scholarship or the opportunity to play beyond high school, but really it's more to keep them safe, to keep them with their friends, to keep them engaged and having, they're busy enough that they're not getting into trouble, and they're also learning and growing. And that's what youth sports is all about.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the most important thing. It's such an opportunity, like Suzanne said, about, if someone has struggles, maybe school isn't their favorite place, or there may be other things going on in their home, life at home. Sometimes sports can be a real oasis. They make relationships with coaches that provide resilience. They grow, they get critical thinking skills. They can enjoy themselves, and sports is so important for all of these other, positive things that it provides.
Okay, so here's one I get quite often too, because I think now we're probably 15 10 to 15 years into everybody's been signing kids up. I'm a big advocate for playing multiple sports. And unfortunately, it's become very hard to do that because you have to commit. I was coaching 9U volleyball for, 4 or 5 years. And I would have moms come to me like, I'm so sorry, we're so late to the game. And I'm like, excuse me? She's like, well, she's 9 and she's never played volleyball before. I'm like, no. Like, this is not about going early. But what we're seeing is because they're starting so early. Like I had a 15-year-old the other day and she was like essentially saying, and not so many words, and her mom's like, she's really good. She's kind of not in love with it anymore. She's already had a pro career. I mean, because when I say, I love to start with, so when did you first play? I don't remember. Right. What do you mean you don't remember? I've never not played. That's her first memory is I could walk, I was playing soccer, right? And I think that's very common these days. And again, I'm not blaming the parents. Like this, we're like, great, they're active, they got a lot of energy, this is fun, sign them up for kick and chase. We all do it. It's not it's not discounting, but what's happening as she's now 16 and she really, when I would say, what do you love about soccer? She said what you said, Suzanne. She's, my friends are there. Right. It wasn't really about, and do you watch soccer? No. Do you want to play in college? No. Well, what is it about soccer? But my friends.
That's equally awesome, right? There's a safe place to go and be with your friends and grow and develop and gain a level of, self-understanding and growth and self-efficacy. I mean, how awesome is that? And you get to see your friends. That's just as fantastic as compared to someone who's maybe naturally competitive and really, gunning, for certain things in their future. Both things can be true and both things can be great. It's just challenging, I think, for parents to navigate, especially when they hear a lot of, oh, you should do this or should do that. And I think Suzanne and I both try to help families really self-reflect on what is most effective for them, particularly, first of all, from the child or teenager's point of view, what they believe is most effective and best for them, but also for the parents to try to decipher that out, which sometimes can be hard when you have a lot of noise coming at you.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's hard when kids have started, and maybe it's not when they've started so little. I think a lot of times when kids are really good at something too, it makes it hard to stop. And if your friends are there and you're really good at something, there is this natural expectation that you finish your career, so whether that's you finish in high school or you finish in college. And yet, sometimes the friends and the just being good at it and having a place to go is a big enough motivator that kids really enjoy it and they want to keep playing. But we certainly hear from teens who are really burnt out and dislike it, or they're unhappy, or it makes them really stressed out in a way that it's not worthwhile to them. And, I've done a lot of pros and cons and a lot of really sitting with kids over this idea of do I quit? And that word quit really comes with this I'm failing, I'm giving it up, and I try to help them reshape that of what if it's you're walking away? What if you're pivoting? What if you're creating space because you actually want to, try out for a different sport, or you're interested in, and yes, your friends are there, but if the sport makes you so miserable, what's another way you can connect with those friends outside of this? Because I do think sometimes there is this feeling for kids, we've invested so much in this, we've got to stay with this, or I've got to see it through, or my parents would be so upset. And it's not always right for kids to stay, until the end of high school or whatever it is.
When you were just talking, Suzanne, what it made me think of, oftentimes we think about this in terms of academics, but it applies to sports 100% as well, is the idea of sort of healthy stress versus unhealthy stress, right? So that healthy stress is the stress that helps you grow and you lean into, and it provides resilience. We often use, which makes sense in this, certainly in your podcast, kind of the exercise metaphor. It hurts a little bit to exercise and your muscles grow, right? And that's what we want the stress to be, of fitting in the extra games or, practices or, you want there to be excitement, and it leads to growth and positivity. But sometimes for some kids, if it's a mismatch between who they are and or where maybe they just want to focus their time, that can lead to a lot of unhealthy stress. Or if it's just too much, and trying to decipher, is this a healthy stress for my child or myself or my teenager, that we want to lean into and encourage, even though sometimes it's difficult? Or is this something that's really causing a level of burnout, or really just isn't a match to who they are? And that's okay. And sort of seeing which sort of stress we're dealing with.
And I think that in this case, what's interesting is the sunk costs of having the time, the resources, and that she's really good, but she's not that vested anymore, is hard as the parent, because you're like, wait, no, you're really good. But if the child is saying, take it or leave it, like, I just don't care. I mean, I usually say, okay, great, here's the good news. It's not sunk costs that are going to go away. Everything you've learned in that experience, you're going to take with you and you're going to use for whatever and here's the fun part. Like, this is the research project. What do we want to get excited about next? What do we want to learn, right? What is that? And maybe it's not a competitive sport. We just want you to be active. What we know is that if you're active into your mid-20s, that you're going to be an athlete for life. And we want you to see yourself as somebody who is an athlete, because we know athletes have better body image. They have more self-confidence. They're more resilient. They take more risks, not because you won whatever trophy or got to whatever podium or got a scholarship. Nobody cares about that. Honestly, it really becomes about your agency and how do you feel about your self-worth.
Yeah.
And that's such a beautiful way that you phrased that to that young person too. And like, even that instance right there, right, is helping them see their own sense of efficacy, right? And kind of adding to that of, okay, you're faced with this challenge, right? Of like, this is always who I've been. I've always been a soccer player. I'm really good, right? And yet I want to do something different or explore or take some chances or try something else. I'm done with this, right? And you or a parent being able to say, this is not a waste of time. All the time you put, like, all of those things you did, like, wow, what are you going to do next? Like, how will you figure this out? Right? Because that's what it's about. And that's the efficacy part, right? Of like, whatever life throws your way, you have a belief like, I can figure this out, or I have some sort of agency to do something. And, those team sports, some of those careers will probably come to an end for most of us, right? But being able to be a lifelong athlete, like seeing yourself as someone who, no matter where you move or what you do, you can have some agency to make, your life be what you want it to be or reach your goals. Like, that's probably what most parents want for their kids.
As I was listening to you again, Suzanne, I was thinking, yes. And at the same time, some of these parents who have their kids come to them and report this or give this information may have spent a lot of time or made certain sacrifices or made certain financial sacrifices. And so it can sometimes be hard for parents, I think, to have, the immediate sort of knee-jerk response that you just laid out so beautifully as the positive. Isn't this, I appreciate that you're understanding this about yourself and we want to support you. It's also, I just want to tagline that with adding on, it's also okay for parents to grieve this a little bit, because they're human and they, have an amazing belief in their children. And sometimes it's hard for parents to make that adjustment or to, and it's okay to take that pause and, talk to a trusted friend or, if there's, if you have a partner, and try to bring yourself to that, because it can be hard, because parents, just like the child may be feeling like, I'm ready to move, but I feel some of those sunk costs, the parent may be like, what, and so it's okay to give yourself a little time. But just remember it tends to work out.
And for parents, you're right. It's a loss of community too. Like, I think about the community I've built on sidelines for years. My son is a senior and we're approaching the end of that. And many of his teammates were a year older. The end of last season was incredibly emotional. I have found myself crying on it's an end of an era. It's been beautiful. It's been wonderful watching so if kids want to, leave the sport or do something else, that can be very emotional for a parent too. And I'm so glad you said that that's okay. Like, not to judge themselves of like, oh my gosh, I'm this invested in my kid's sport. Like, yeah, it's a huge thing in
Yeah.
your life, in your child's life. Like, you've enjoyed it. It's been your community. You've spent a lot of money, probably sacrificed many weekends of your life.
Yeah, I think parents' generation or grandparents' generation, your community came through your church and through, you had all of these other outside things. And I know my parents, you want to play, Kirsten, you want to quit? Okay, fine. Like, they were completely nonplussed about any of it, right? And they had their own communities. And now our communities have all melded into, because of the time commitment, because of the financial commitment, because of the travel, those become your people. And I wrote the story in the book of, I was checking out at a Target on a rainy Saturday in Buffalo, New York, trying to buy a lawn chair or an umbrella because it was so rainy. And the woman was laughing. She's like, oh, I used to do that. I'm like, what? She's like, go to those soccer games every single Saturday, rain or shine. And I was like, oh. And she said, yeah. And finally, my son graduated, and I cried. And I said, oh, aren't you going to miss this? And he said, Mom, I stopped liking soccer about 4 years ago, but I couldn't quit because I knew how much it mattered to you, right?
Yeah.
And great mom, not bad parenting. And I'm not judging, but parents, as we go through these moments, what I like to say is, the best parenting advice I ever heard was have 90 1-minute conversations with your kid, right? Keep checking in, keep asking them, hey, that looked like it was a great season last year. What do you think about this year? And if at freshman, sophomore, junior, maybe senior year, they're like, we're done. I'm done. I want to go do something else. We have to remember whose journey it is and not let our own ego, which is really hard because we have all the answers. We've been here before. We want to help you avoid pain, right? We with the best intentions, sometimes overtake them and don't allow them to have their own journey.
Right. Yeah, I often find myself reminding myself in my own parenting, but also in working with clients saying, just remember it's theirs. It was their loss today. It was their decision to choose a different sport. It was their, whatever it was. It was their failed grade. It's not yours, whatever it is. Yeah.
Can I pivot a little bit? So another interesting topic that I just, knowing your backgrounds, and I just think with what's going on in the world between cell phones, COVID, these kids have, what I'm hearing is, the delay in maturity, the delay in being able to advocate for themselves because they're so much online. They're not used to even learning how to look somebody in the eye and articulate what they want. So kids are struggling off the field as much as they are on the field. And I feel like they're intertwined where, like, one client who just transferred clubs, and the mom is saying she's completely stressed because she's just not good with meeting new friends. Mm-hmm. And I feel like, I was like, but she's been playing this her whole life. Yeah, but the way things are set up now, they're so isolated that they're having a harder time being okay with, okay, this is a new group and I'm going to go meet new friends and it's a new school, it's a new classroom, it's a new opportunity. Are you seeing that? And like what, and it's stressful for the parent, right? Because you want them to thrive. And what they're doing is, well, I don't want to play anymore. Well, I don't know anybody. Trying to get them just to get to the sidelines and try it. And well, the only one person I know, she's not even there today, so I'm not going. And helping them through those moments is very stressful for us too as parents, but also for the kids.
Mm-hmm. I think I heard sort of two levels of issues in what you or possible quote unquote issues in what you just described. One level is that we have to remember as parents, as psychologists, that the world is different now from how we remember it. And like you said, with social media and other things, there are a lot of conveniences we have that allow us to quote unquote connect with people or get things done, or even just with the entree of email in the 90s, late 90s, when I don't know, whenever that happened, that changed the amount of times that people made phone calls, right? And then texting, and then social media, and then on and on and on, and AI, where there are a lot of changes, and certainly COVID added to that. Right. So when kids just what I might have, thought, you just make a phone call, that can be an incredible amount of anxiety. So part of it's that the culture has shifted, and that's sort of one thing to acknowledge. Then there's also, and then COVID, I think, took away a lot of the socialization. So that increased anxiety. We know that to be the case for a number of children. But then there are also just kids who genuinely struggle with social anxiety. And so there's different layers of what you're talking about there. But one thing that I always try to remember, and I know Suzanne has mentioned to me, at different times, is to try to have a little humility as a parent. We have to help them. Certainly our child helps scaffold them towards the socialization that they need, but also having a little bit of humility that we don't know exactly what it's like for them, or exactly how their friends are communicating, or how, and sometimes we do things to help and we're off the mark because we don't, live in that world. So someone might say, well, no social media until X age. And I have a lot of feelings about, trying to scaffold and limit social media. And for certain sports teams, you have to have it, right? Or for certain friendships, you don't use the phone and you may not text. They might be communicating a different way. And so we have to be curious with our kids, as well as, so not just assuming that we know that they need to push. I don't know if I'm speaking properly. Suzanne,
that was the word. That was when you said assume, I was like, yes, that's it. Because I've made this mistake as a parent many times when you were speaking, Kirsten, I thought, sometimes we can kind of jump to these conclusions, and I do this, for sure. Like, oh, the kids don't know how to socialize anymore, or oh, they, and I was thinking when you were sharing that story, I thought, oh, I wonder how old that teen or child is, because a teenager, a tweenager, switching teams after you've maybe played on one team for a long time and mostly known everyone, and maybe one or two new people to go to another team that may also have been together since they were young, and integrating into that team socially at different ages. That's not impossible, but it can be really hard, and it can be uncomfortable, and it can feel very embarrassing. And even, sometimes I've heard this too about, like, they won't get out of the car, and that is so hard as a parent to know what to do. And then you're afraid if they're going to be late, then the coach will think something bad of them, right? So you're stuck in that social, what other people are going to think too. But we forget sometimes that at certain ages, it's really hard to walk in somewhere by yourself. And that isn't necessarily an anxiety disorder or refusal, or it's awkward or embarrassing at that age. And, tweens and teens tend to feel some of those emotions much more strongly than we might. And so it might seem ridiculous to us or problematic, or it's going to cause other problems. But trying to keep that in mind, and not just assuming like, oh, they have terrible social skills, or they have all this burgeoning anxiety, so I have to push them. You might have to help encourage them, but if you don't assume and you're kind of like, what's up here? You might hear like, I'm the only person walking out by myself, or everybody has on that color practice jersey, and because I'm new, I don't have it. So like, you might find out some other things that are going to help you encourage, versus you've got to face your fears and get out of here. Or, in my day, we got dropped off and we just had to learn how to talk to people, right? Like, you may just miss the boat on that. And so there might be a more effective way to help encourage them to face challenges and do hard things. Or you might find out at some point that isn't the right team and the right place, that maybe those girls aren't welcoming to your daughter, and that's never going to happen. And so you'll hear about that and can support them in that way.
you hear there's a clique, there's these four and they're the lead and nobody else can, they don't even look at me. They won't even make eye contact with me. Right. And I'm like, these are your teammates. Right. And I dealt with a little bit of that growing up too, where, kids, the more insecure they are, ironically, right? The more they circle the wagons and they don't allow new people in. And then if you're a threat, if you happen to be good, right? Like you may be threatening to take away one of their positions. So, which is of course the opposite of what you think. Oh, here I am to help. Here I am to make the team better. They're going to want me there. And so you get these opposite messages, which is very confusing for a 14, 15-year-old.
But what you just highlighted there, Kristen, is exactly it. We don't know exactly the dynamics, so we jump to conclusions. I know I've done it myself. My children would report that to you if they were here. But I think having that curiosity or reminding yourself something else might be going on here can be helpful.
Another thing
anxiety-provoking.
Yeah, I heard you two talk about on one of your podcasts, which I love and I try to use as well, which is humor. Sometimes humor can really help. And I can't remember exactly what example you were using, but how do we inject humor, levity to a situation that could otherwise be stressful to our kids? Could you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think there are plenty of opportunities, but Suzanne, do you have one specific in mind or?
No, I was just saying, I think you have to be thoughtful about it. And, if it doesn't land, you apologize and say, I'm sorry. I thought that was going to make you laugh and I went in the wrong direction. Because we do have to be careful that our kids don't feel like we're taunting them, making fun of them, mocking them in some ways or mocking their emotions.
But I mock myself. I mean, I think that is a way because I do step in it all the time. And I think that kids, teenagers, young adults appreciate when we acknowledge that. And it doesn't always have to be. That can be hard for parents to acknowledge when they mess up, but it really builds our relationship with our kids when we can acknowledge that we mess up. And sometimes I do that by just saying, oh, so I was totally wrong. Like I was way off. And they're like, yes, you were. And that just cuts it or I was really irritable there and I'm sorry, I think humor can go a long way to, as long as it's not, interpreted by your child as criticism on them or something like that.
Well, I think it's also modeling that it's okay to be wrong, right?
Yes.
And that's, I think, part of what we live in this perfectionist society where you got to get the 4 or 5 and you got to go to this school and you get like, no, you don't. And I work with my clients a lot on that. This is an opportunity. This isn't the opportunity. This isn't the only time. I have 2 equestrian clients at the moment, and they're both very, very good, but they both have this idea that I have to ride a perfect round every time. And so we have to do the math. Like, okay, so how many rounds have you been on this horse?
Yes.
I don't know. Thousands. Okay. And so yesterday you had 1 bad round? Well, not really a bad round. I just knocked down 1 fence.
Right.
Okay. So in thousands of rounds and thousands of hours that you've been on this horse, you knock down a fence? And then they go, oh, right? But we need the perspective to realize that. And then as a parent, be like, yeah, I did that wrong. I am so sorry that I overstepped my boundaries. But then that shows them that it's okay to say, yeah, I knocked a fence down. Oh, well, I got to go do it again.
And this is, it's okay to be wrong and modeling that, if that client, now, of course, this involves a horse. So I don't think I would recommend this with regard because I don't have expertise in horses. However, there certainly have been plenty of times when perfectionism pops up wherever it may be in sports, in school, in being able to get on a city bus when I, worked in New York City, whatever it was, I would prescribe as homework going and purposely making the mistake. Going and purposely getting on the bus and not having your Metro card back in the day when that's what it was, or, and finding out that that's okay. So I don't know that I could make a horse trip over a fence and that's probably dangerous and a bad idea, but there's gotta be a way. And that would be a homework assignment to just kind of get over the fear of that because it is just too much pressure. And that's where we get over to that unhealthy stress, which causes, burnout and there's a lot of pressure. People feel that.
No, but you're right, Annalise. You could ride off course. Like, oops, I rode over the fences in the wrong order.
Right. Let's do that 3 times this week and then find out what happens.
Yeah. And what happened? Nothing. I mean, okay, we're going to do it again. I mean, now we're going to do it in a different order. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, that's
Right.
great advice. I love
Yeah.
that.
And that even if it doesn't go perfectly okay, right? You forget the card or you're checking out and you purposely don't bring money and you have to tell out the checkout clerk you forgot your, right? You feel embarrassed and it feels awkward and uncomfortable. And maybe you ride the horse in the wrong direction and people kind of look at you from their horses in the ring and they're like, why is she doing it that way? And you move on from it. Like, let's practice that even if it's not totally okay, that you can survive it. So that if worst case in a competition, you miss the shot, you ride the horse and you do the wrong thing, you'll get through it, even if it feels uncomfortable in the moment. And being uncomfortable sometimes is a part of life. As much as none of us like it and we want to avoid it, it actually opens you up to maybe enjoy riding the horse a lot more if you're willing to accept it might not go perfectly every time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've been on this, both have been on the sidelines, and you've seen those parents that you really don't want to be sitting next to because they're emoting, over emoting, yelling, doing whatever. What advice do you have for parents who are, trying to do the right thing but can't seem to, keep it in check?
Do you mean like those parents who are yelling if they?
Yeah, if I'm a parent, I mean, so it's interesting. I think there is a better level of self-awareness. I have a email that I subscribe to about youth sports, and there's at least one call out a week from around the country of some parent clocking a ref or going out and hitting a child or I mean, it's insane that you still, and it's like 8U hockey, or it's, the ref was 12. I mean, it's in, and you're seeing this huge drop off in people wanting to ref because it's like, why would I put myself for $50 or $25 or whatever at risk? But I do feel like, or I'd like to think with our work, there's a little bit more of like, ooh, that's me. Okay. And, my opening story is a dad who paid to fly a plane over a baseball field, right? That said, fire Coach Smith and Coach Kowalczyk, not because the team was losing, not because they didn't like the coaches. In fact, everybody liked the coaches, but because his kid wasn't playing. What are you doing to your own child's sense of self-worth when everybody figures out that that's your parent that just did that, right? So maybe you're not one of those parents, maybe you're not clocking somebody or paying for but even if you just feel it, like I mean, I would have to go take a lap because, go separate myself, put a lollipop in your mouth, talk to a friend, get on your phone if you have to. But do you have any other great advice for parents who are feeling this anxiety that they can't make peace with?
Well, I think you just hit, one great piece of advice is take that break. Go walk around the field. Go, talk to a friend. Go sit in the car for a little bit. Pretend like you're making a phone call. That's if you have that sort of self-awareness that maybe your emotional intensity is getting too high because just remember that your child's on the field, and if it doesn't feel good to have that much attention on your parent, or for the kid just to see that much emotion, like to feel like this much rides on a soccer game or a baseball game, that my parent's going to be that upset. And I have a lot of, empathy for parents because they care a lot, and that's where the high emotion's coming from. But wanting to do that, and maybe just even trying to hold in mind that what we communicate with our body language, with our facial expressions, with what we're saying and doing, it also communicates kind of like our values and what we care about. And so do we want one game to be that important? And if we feel ourselves getting there, that might be the perfect time to distract, take a break, and regroup. Because I'm not sure, I think that when it gets to that level that you just described, Kristen, that a parent really wants it to be that, when something doesn't go my way, I go and clock the coach. I don't think that's really what people intend.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, I would like to think so as well. And I think a lot of times parents have come to me and we've talked this through, that it can take work. And I think there's a realization of that sometimes, that taking that time before you go to a game. Maybe your kid is there for warm-ups and sitting in the car for 10 or 15 minutes before you get out, maybe going for a walk or jogging and getting some positive, endorphins and things for yourself, and thinking about how you want to show up at that game, how you want to show up, at your child's event, and what is your best self as a parent in that moment, because it's very easy to lose our cool. If you see your child getting hurt or pushed around on a field, if you see your child not playing and they've worked so hard, there's, sports is very much like the real life. There's things that are unfair that take place, and that's deeply emotional. But when we can turn that on its side, I'll say to parents, it's very hard, but we're also really lucky as sports parents, because your child or teen is going to school all day and they're dealing with hard things and things that are unfair and problematic, and you don't know anything about it. And we are so lucky when we get to kind of witness some of this in sports, that you can really think about, how do you want to show up to best support your child or teen and help them grow in being able to support themselves, because you get a window that many parents don't get into their kids' lives, particularly as they become teenagers. So think about this as a privilege, and let's think about, when they mess up on the field and make a mistake and they look at you, do they want to see you throwing your hands up in the air or shouting something at them? Or do they want to look and see you give them a reassuring face so that they know, all right, I screwed up. They know it. Every athlete knows. They don't need their parent or coach to tell them.
Oh, yeah.
They know. But if they look at you and they see that, like, you're okay, let's keep going, they can turn back and tune into themselves and that sense of efficacy and resiliency, and like, all right, my team needs me. I've got to keep going and move past this. So I think sometimes for parents, it takes a lot of work of really being thoughtful and showing up at a game with a mindset, with a mantra you're repeating. Put in an AirPod where you're listening to something that maybe helps you. Go for walks, take breaks when you notice your emotions starting to escalate, and find another adult, not at the side of the field because people can hear you and it's negative. Find another adult in your life that you can vent to when these things are frustrating. If your child's not getting playing time, if you feel like things are unfair, if they're struggling in some way, if they keep messing up and you've been practicing it with them, like, it's okay for you to feel that way, but find the appropriate outlet, because I think the appropriate outlet isn't punching the 12-year-old ref or yanking your child off the field or threatening the kid on the other team that knocked your daughter over. That, I think we got to really think about, like, what is my outlet for dealing with my frustration and high emotions as a parent? Because for many of us, that's going to happen. People do feel emotions, and that's okay. It's what are we doing with those?
And where else in your life is that showing up? I would think if that's where you're deciding to vent,
Yeah.
that might be somewhere going on somewhere else where you're feeling left out, less than, passed over,
Powerless.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that can be really hard to look at our own lives, right? And I think sometimes for parents, sometimes the parents who kind of, really lose their cool and do these things, oftentimes I'll find out afterwards that there were a lot of vulnerability factors for them, and they didn't have the resiliency to kind of absorb. Annalise you talk a lot about, like, being able to absorb shock. I think sometimes these are parents who are dealing with a lot, and then their child's not getting playing time, and they, and the coach is right there. And so they actually have that moment to do it. But, I think being really thoughtful about whether that's going to help us or help our child or teen, because, we have to remember too, like, community is so important for kids and for our teenagers in particular. Like, these are not just teammates, like, these are friends, and these relationships are really important. And even though as parents, sometimes we might feel like the coach is being unfair, or this kid's not, taking my daughter's spot on the team, like, it's bigger than just the sport.
And sometimes I think the kids may handle that better than the parents do. If they are, whatever, the second baseman, and they don't get played because there's another second baseman on the team who got 70% time and you get 30, whatever it is, sometimes the kids are better about that than we parents can be. So again,
I would actually say most of the time the kids are I would solidly say most of the time.
Because they have a coach who's figuring this out, and we're supposed to be the parent. So keeping that in mind, but we can learn from our kids. Take a cue from them.
Yeah, one key or thing to think on parents, and this is what's interesting, I just find it fascinating, is when the parent will call and say, well, we aren't getting playing time, well, we aren't starting, well, we aren't doing, wait, we like, who's we?
Right.
She or he, and then you get the kid on the phone because she's like, we're really upset that we went down to the twos and this and that, and then you get the girl on the phone, she's like, oh, I'm totally happy on the twos. She's like, this girl and this girl's really much better than I am. They're much, because they're there, because they understand where they stack up, and also they're realistic about, but the parent goes, well, no, we paid all this money, we need to be on the ones team, that's where they're going to get better, that's where they're going to be. They're 10, whether they're seen or like, this is not what that's about. Friends, fun, and fundamentals. Forget the FOMO.
And in that, what you just described there, Kirsten, that attempt to help on the parents' part, but we paid the money, they have the skill set, whatever it is, then the child inadvertently gets the message that they're less than, that they should have been something else. Whereas if they could have just been on the twos, maybe they'd be a little bit upset and we support them through that, or maybe they wouldn't have. And we certainly shouldn't add on,
Yeah.
And we can make that mistake of doing a lot of fortune telling. I think we talk a lot with parents about those cognitive thinking traps. My child didn't make that team, or they moved from the ones to the twos. They're going to be so upset. They're not going to be able to make friends on that team. They're going to fall behind. And very often a few months after something has happened, sometimes even a few weeks, I'll talk to parents, and much of the time it worked out. Their kid's getting more playing time. They're happier. They really love the coach. They're sad, but now the kid is outside every day working on their own because they want next year to make the highest team. Mm-hmm. And so they've taken it on themselves, right? So much of the time we can get so wrapped up in the what ifs and kind of this fortune telling of like, this is going to go so poorly and my child's going to be destroyed. And, I talk with a lot of people about like the alternate what ifs. Like, yes, there's all the what ifs of what if they fall behind? What if their friends stop talking to them? But what if this is a real growing experience? What if it turns out that because they're playing on the second team, they have time to also write for the school paper, and we tend to go very negative about the what ifs. And sometimes as parents, when we can open that up of like, what else could be true here, we can kind of take it down a notch or two.
It might be lore, but I was told by a friend that Steven Spielberg famously wrote a letter to his high school football coach saying, thank you so much for cutting me, because had I not got cut from freshman football, I wouldn't have had the time, right? And I mean, even if it's not true, the idea of that, and I just heard Tom Brady interviewed I'm not a huge Tom Brady fan, but I love what his story is, to be the seventh to the fifth to the backup to, getting the last guy drafted to coming in behind a guy who had $150 million contract. You're never going to play. Right? Mm-hmm. He's like, but I never looked at it that way. I was never worried about the outcome. We have to focus on the process and not the outcome. And we get so outcome focused. Yes. And again, we get it. We start projecting and prognosticating about who our kid might be one day. And we got to be here now. We got to enjoy this moment and allow them to have this moment.
Right.
And it's hard. Yeah. And every single phase, you're like, oh, can I go back to that phase? Because that phase was easier.
I know.
Right? You're like,
that is so true.
But I love some other advice you guys gave on one of your podcasts. You were talking about being curious. And I think this is another good one. So I talk about the car ride home and only 6 words they need to hear. I love to watch you play.
Yes.
That's it. But when the time is, when the cortisol levels have dropped, maybe it's the next day, depending on the kid, maybe it's an hour or 2 later, but you'll know when you're not all revved up and they're not all revved up. That is the time to ask some good questions, right? Like you were touching on that earlier about, if we get ourselves out of the way, we could just be these great facilitators. And so talk about curiosity and what a great role that plays in helping coach and parent our kids.
I think there's just so much, whether we're talking about sports or really anything, that we can learn from our kids. And so often our assumptions are wrong. So something may have been very difficult. Maybe they didn't get onto the team that they tried out for and they worked for, and maybe that was devastating for a period of time. But being curious about how that feels afterwards, and not assuming that they need to get on, I don't know, the second rate team or the this, that, or the other. We just can learn a lot, And I also think, particularly as our children are becoming teenagers, they really respond when we show them a level of respect, when we act with that curiosity, have a little humility. That builds the relationship. And you know what? A lot of the time, I learn a lot that way. And as opposed to when we're just telling what to do because of what we think is right, which often is very well intentioned, but it's just more collaborative to learn from your kid. I think regardless of whether it's with sports or school or whatever it might be.
Life. Yeah.
Yeah. And curiosity isn't always asking questions either. And, questions are great. But being curious, which is why, I love to watch you play, and then just being quiet in the car. And obviously I talk for a living, but we do listen for a living too. I always say, even though it doesn't make sense, sit on my hands, but that's what I think of to myself. And that to me is zip your lips, because sometimes when you're quiet, they just say things.
For sure.
There's a lot that is said when sometimes you're just being quiet. And sometimes being curious is kind of just joining with them in what they're doing. As my kids have gotten older, it's harder for me to play sports with them because they're really strong and really good, and I'm going to get injured. But my oldest son watches a lot of sports and soccer videos. And so sometimes being curious is just joining him where he is and sitting with him and watching those. And then he'll start talking about players, or he'll start talking about a move he's working on, or, and so sometimes being curious is just, especially teenagers, just being around them quietly. Because if we ask them a lot of questions, oftentimes they feel like we're angling towards something, what'd you think about getting cut from that team? Or I heard this person made captain. What do you think about that? And they intuit sometimes accurately, sometimes inaccurately, that we're angling for something. But, I'll sometimes be folding laundry or working on something, and I'll say to one of my teens, oh, if you're working on the computer, do you mind? I'm going to fold laundry in your room. I'm not listening in. I'm not, sometimes just being curious and putting yourself in their space and not making them come into yours, whether that's talking about the game when you want to talk about it, or whether, whatever that is, meeting them where they are. And sometimes it's just quiet.
I agree. My favorite strategies, I live in LA, so you're in the car a lot. So there was a lot of hours where even if we weren't talking, the podcast is on that might be, or a book that I was listening to that might have some knowledge that you want them to hear, or taking on a hike. Let's go take the dog for a walk and let them drive the conversation. Let them decide what the topics are. And again, it's hard because we feel like we have this finite window to talk to them about X, Y, and Z. And you know what? Maybe they don't want to talk about that today. And the fact that you're willing to not drive the conversation, I think, usually something really good comes out of it, and they feel the trust and the bond and build. And that's such a beautiful thing.
I agree.
Yeah.
Sorry, I realize we're over time, and I know you both need to go. I'm having so much fun.
I could chat. I would chat about this, about teenagers, about sports forever. But I do have a client who should be arriving, or maybe in the waiting room.
He's here. Okay. Well, could you please, before we go, then let people know where they can find you and listen to you and learn from you?
Well, our practice is in Westport, Connecticut, but we also have a podcast called the Parenting Pair Podcast, where we talk about all things tweens, teens, and young adults. And you can find us there on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.
And we also have on Instagram too.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh, right.
Follow them on Instagram.
At the Parenting Pair. Yeah. Yes.
At the Parenting Pair. Dr. Suzanne, Dr. Annalise, thank you so much for your time. This was lovely.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Same. All right, parents, you got this. We got this. Reach out, DM us, ask questions. This is where we all can help each other. It takes a village. We're all doing the best we can from where we are with what we've got. And
100%.
you got this.